Okay, it's a rainy day outside, and I'm thinking, should I post this? Shouldn't I post this? Well, if you're watching it, obviously I have posted it. It's actually a bit of a rant. It's the 5 things I most dislike about the headphone or kind of audiophile community I'm in. And these are, everyone has their own idea about the worst things about, online audio and reviews and all that kind of thing. But this is my kind of top 5 worst. At the bottom of the list is kind of a very simple one, and it's not a difficult one to solve. It's kind of number 5, seeking the wrong things in audio. And of course, people come into the hobby and they don't know what to look for, and they see certain things being kind of considered, you should do this or do that, or they see things mentioned like high res, and they buy some simple gear and they think, oh, should I get high res music? Will it make everything sound better? And no, obviously, no, that won't. They're going about things kind of the wrong way around, and it's getting a basic understanding of what things make a difference primarily, such as different headphones more suited to your music, and adjusting to how loud you listen, and probably not listening too loud, and buying stuff that if you're down in the low end of the range, like you're buying a cheap portable player and you want to use it with full-size headphones, knowing that you needed a bit more power. So it's kind of really, it's like back when I used to do help people online with computer stuff. People who'd have a computer problem and they thought they knew what the solution was to their computer problem, and they'd come in and ask for help with doing the solution. And you'd ask, why do you want to do this? And they'd tell you, and they say, oh, well, that's actually not the right way to go about solving your problem. What you'll think is a solution is actually something different. So that's kind of a fairly minor one on the bottom of the scale. And but educating people in where to put their priorities is kind of difficult, because audio has become so much more complicated than it was 10 years ago. The number of brands out there, the number of manufacturers, most of the time, but in some ways it's become very simple. I just say to a lot of people, essentially, well, just buy some Bluetooth noise cancelling headphones and that will take care of 90% of the problem, which you can do. Just buy some Sony WH-1000s. Simple. Solves all the problem. You don't need any complex electronics except something that transmits Bluetooth, and will do 90% of the job anyway. Anyway, number 4, and some people are going to think this should be higher on the list, but I don't think so. It's hype trains. And that means some new product will come out and people will think, this is amazing new thing, and get all excited around it. I find most people watching HeadFi and having been on HeadFi for 10 years that it's often people who've just started on the forums and something is being talked about a lot, and then so the people who've just come on get involved and get interested and start reading about it and want to buy the product themselves and get caught up in the hype. That's not so much a bad thing, as there aren't so many products that are so much bad. I mean, even stuff I've tested which is extremely hyped is very good. It's maybe not worthy quite of the extreme accolades that people may hype on a lot of stuff, but still, if people buy the product, generally it tends to be good. It's more so that my dislike of hype trains is where I come into number 3, and that's one of the hype trains around things that measure really well, and it's because of bad and misleading science. Now, there are people who have posted about this with showing how measurements can be manipulated and adjusted. And back when I started, I thought, why isn't, for example, digital? Why isn't digital just ones and zeros? And why can't I just use the cheapest optical cable from my my computer to my DAC, and why won't it work perfectly fine? So I was argued for this a while, until I had bought a cheap optical cable for the DAC I had at the time. And then when I plugged in a more expensive optical cable and noticed a change in the sound, I was like, oh, wait a second, how is this possible? When I learned how it was possible, then I realized that it's very possible easily to oversimplify the science around things. Probably worse still, is this is one of the big things I dislike, is it's easy to manipulate science and easy to manipulate measurements so they show what you want them to and not the truth of what's going on. And unfortunately, one of the most popular people who does this has been clearly manipulating measurements and clearly not showing how he came about certain measurements, and as a result, or deliberately setting up products from manufacturers he doesn't like to show bad results so that they get a poor reputation. And it's very easy to see in something simple like this. Let's say you look at a graph with a simple 1 kilohertz spike, and it shows all the distortion around that 1 kilohertz spike in the middle. Now, look at the top of that. You often see some of these graphs overlaid, and you'll sometimes see that they're measured at minus 3 dB. They're measured in reverse from 0 downwards. So they're showing how much below for the full power signal you have kind of distortion artifacts of various kinds, depending on the measurement being taken. So often they're measured at 0 dB or minus 3 dB. Now the thing is, when you have people doing stuff like they have one graph which is taken at 0 dB and the other one is taken at minus 3 dB because they want the one product to look worse, they'll put one at 0 dB. That means it is going to show higher distortion, obviously, than the one taken at minus 3 dB, and you can it's very easy to verify this yourself, as people have taken measurements with both 0 and minus 3 dB to show how this changes. And so it shows one product with the overlaid graphs. You can see clearly that the product the person wants to favor has been measured at the lower rate, so it shows lower distortion. It's really bad in manipulative science. It's really bad for everyone that people are doing this. And there's a great post I'm not going to link to, but a guy who is a professional, whose job is to professionally measure equipment, has posted how it's very easy to make a product look bad just by simple things, by using the say passing stuff through the Windows mixer, which might increase distortion or what have you. Very simple ways of making a product look bad in measurements, and without showing exactly what settings the computer had and the measuring gear had. No matter how expensive your measuring gear is, it doesn't matter if you buy the best analyzer in the world. If you are doing stuff to make the measurements look bad, like you're running the interconnects for one product across the power cable, or who knows, there are many different ways of making measurements look bad, then it's really bad for everyone in the industry. And getting, trying to create hype around this you can easily tell this because often they will trash particular manufacturers when they do this. And this is where my next thing comes up, is what I call the number 2, which is obsession with people, say with manufacturers or particular ideas such as low distortion, obsession with things like MQA, obsessing with what particular people do or particular ideas. That can be very bad for the hobby, and I find it probably one of the biggest problems. For example, the discussion around MQA lately has been quite toxic in many respects. MQA, I'll do a whole video on this, was originally advertised in a way, falsely advertised as being lossless. And then, of course, you can still see the old articles in audio magazines which show this. And you'll have these people who have vitriolically pointed out all the flaws with the MQA and all their arguments, and also people who have vitriolically tried to discredit everyone who has criticized MQA. And it's an encoding format which has complex issues, but because of its complexity, the people's obsessions get caught up on simple ideas like lower distortion is better, or this sounds better, or cables are all rubbish, or only trust your ears, or all this kind of thing, where the truth is kind of more complex than that. And because of these oversimplifications, like choosing purely objectivist thinking, purely subjectivist thinking, these extremes, just like extremes in society in general, are really bad and do damage to the industry overall. So kind of what you call black and white thinking, or black and white or very extreme thinking, is not good for anyone. And every aspect, I have gear here that measures amazingly well, such as the chord gear. I have non-oversampling DACs here, which measure amazingly badly but sound really fantastic. I have everything sitting around here, one of the best measuring headphone amps in the world. I have a tube amp right next to it. I have everything around here, and everything has its merits and demerits in that. But understanding where and when these demerits and merits are useful and when they are not useful is more complex than the simple this is good and this is bad thinking. And that leads to the number 1, is that when I talked about obsession with people, is obsession with people who are genuinely toxic. They're very often, and this happened on Headfire, you'd have someone become very popular, they become very helpful, they gain maybe some scientific knowledge, or some technical knowledge, and people flocked around them to hear what they'd say about stuff. And then those people actually were very insecure. They'd usually pick one manufacturer and they deliberately target that manufacturer to say bad things about them. And they'd pick that manufacturer as the enemy, and they'd get all the people around them to criticize that manufacturer and trash that manufacturer. It could be a single person. And it actually caused a lot of distress to certain people who were genuinely interested in making good products. And they were basically got to the point where lies were being told about certain people. And then, of course, when they get kicked off Headfire, they end up making their own forum or their own group, and they go about, oh, we were kicked off to hide the truth about the manufacturer. Absolute rubbish. And it's these really toxic people. If basically, it's now even infected YouTube, where I've seen one guy just trash out other reviewers, and it's for example, as a reviewer, I do my own thing. I really don't care what other people do for the most part. And, I have to live with whatever I say and stuff I screw up on video, which I have. But to build yourself up by trashing other people is really, really bad and toxic behavior. As someone who I very clearly know my own limitations as a person. I know when the science I have knowledge about is limited. I know my own limitations, and you'll hear me say this in the video when I say kind of this is about something is above my pay grade kind of thing. I mean, it's more technical and more complex than I am aware of, and I always say as I understand stuff, because I don't understand audio fully, and I know that. And I make clear that in my case, I know my own limits, but I don't have to put other people down to boost myself up. And I see so many other people having to do that. These what I call often toxic leaders of communities who insist on picking a manufacturer, trashing that manufacturer to make themselves look good. Look, we're saving you from buying this products from this evil manufacturer who has terrible measurements on their stuff or whatever. And it's really amazing how they go about, again, they do everything that is kind of bad on my list. They encourage people to seek the wrong things. They encourage hype trains around products who are from people who they like or from their friends, if they're friends in the industry. And MQA is a huge example of what happened to the audiophile press. I'm very sure that the whole MQA thing came about in the press because they trusted everything their good old mate Bob Stewart said, and everything that mate Bob Stewart said wasn't quite correct, and often sometimes was blatantly not true. But that's another thing altogether. And they promote bad and misleading science. MQA is a poster child of this. People posting measurements with different levels on each product to make one look more distorting than the other is a poster child of this. Their obsession, again, with certain manufacturers or certain ideas being correct or being wrong, such as some of the measurements claiming stuff wasn't capable because making the arbitrary fact made up. NWAV guy is an example of this. Oh, everything below minus 95 dB is inaudible. So the fact that my ODAC has huge distortion spikes below that, it is irrelevant. No, it's not. It's an absolutely rubbish DAC by general standards. It was just a cheap thing. Albeit, $99 it was fine, but still, it's that kind of thing people obsessing about. And here's an example. Distortion down to minus 140 dB. Well, I mean, the difference between 120 and 140 dB is nothing. It's an irrelevantly low measurement. That I'll get into the review of that. It's the toxic leaders, in my opinion, are the ones who assemble everything that I don't like about this hobby and can bring it all together into one box. So that's my 5 things. So the things I recommend people look out for is, and you'll see these people, if you point out that they're wrong or there's something wrong, they'll justify what they say, they'll try and defend what they say. They go nuts, basically, or they try and destroy the other person who's criticizing them, which is very often happens. And you'll see it's a thing to look out for, and there are millions of articles online how to look out for toxic managers, toxic people in the workplace. They have much the same kind of traits as those people. So, for example, if I say something that's wrong, you tell me. Or if you're something you disagree, I'm happy to have people disagree with me. For example, but you'll see these people, if you disagree with them, they'll say they allow disagreement, but if they make any comment which disagrees with what people says, nobody will criticize them. You'll find that because they'll just get hammered by all the other people who do agree with the toxic leader. So these things you should all be aware of. Hype trains, well, they're not so bad by themselves. Usually most products that come out aren't bad. Bad and misleading science is a big problem. My father was a scientist, and there is what's reported in the news is just a really superficial look at what science is about. Science is extremely complex. Things like audio, things like the environment, things like everything around you, medicine, are extremely complex topics. If you read what you read in the news, compared to what you see, there was a research done on a certain thing, what you read in the news is usually a big summary. And when you read the actual research, it is totally different to what you read in the news. It's vastly more complex and vastly more in-depth, and often very difficult to comprehend. So look out for oversimplifications in science. The other thing is obsession. If someone is going about trashing a company, stay away from them. Yeah, sure, there are companies I don't like so much, or maybe there are companies I like more, obviously, but people look out for people who are just trying to destroy a company, and every time they post anything about them, it is negative and destructive, and they no, and the last one, look out for people who are, when their argument is countered, they start attacking the person. That's a big, huge red flag, and you should look that out. It's like good old Margaret Thatcher said that she knew she knew she'd won an argument when people started attacking her personally. So those are my 5 things I really hate about the audiophile kind of community, audiophile kind of the whole hobby. So I hope this maybe was vaguely useful for you, and thanks for allowing me to have my soapbox. What do you think? Make the post comments below, and tell me if you think I'm on the money or or off the money.